Good evening. It is 5:30 p.m. and we're calling this workshop session of the Lewisville City Council to order. We do have a quorum. First thing on the agenda tonight is a brief discussion of the regular agenda items and consent agenda items. So council, if you would please go to your agenda. By the way, if you are sitting in the room or anywhere here, these microphones pick up everything. So just so you know. All right, so let's go ahead and move over to our regular session. We've got the invocation with Councilmember Jones. We've got Councilmember Troyer with the pledges. We have oaths of office. We're going to do that in bulk. We have some life-saving awards.
That's awesome.
That is very awesome. Can't wait to hear the story. It's a great story. Public hearing number 1, consideration of an ordinance for zone change.
There hasn't been any. Michelle's back over here in the corner. Has there been any objection to any of this? Any opposition out there, Michelle?
No opposition.
Public hearing number 2, zone change again in Old Town. Public hearing number 3, from LI and AO to heavy industrial.
Is that the only thing that could be, is that they just wanted to be heavy industrial? Is that?
I think my understanding is their plan in the future, so first to zone, is that I believe it's the owner of ProTown, right?
Yes, it's the owners of ProTo, and they'd like to potentially expand in the future, and then not onto all of it, but onto a portion of it, and then develop the street-facing front with more of a lighter use, but they do want to expand on the back portion.
Okay.
Public hearing number 4, special use permit for motorcycle sales and service.
So I had a question. Is this an operating, for this one and the next one, these are already operating businesses? Did I read that right?
Michelle?
Yeah, so they're, one is the boat facility is operating in Lewisville, NTX Elite Marine, so this would be a different location for them.
Okay.
And the motorcycle, 2 Wheels Down, was operating as a online only sales type facility. And so they're just wanting to get SUPs to kind of broaden that a little bit.
Okay, my understanding was that they were already operating in that location, but that's not the case.
The boat place is doing all their repairs and additions currently at a different location, and they have their offices there, but they want to be able to do the repairs in the back there as well. And then the motorcycle place is operating there, but it is right now just an online sales only type.
Okay, that's where, okay, gotcha.
Yeah, that building's got roll-up doors on the back.
Yeah.
Item 5, special use permit for boat sale. We've covered that basically. All right, anything on the consent agenda? Item 6. Item 7. Item 8. Item 9. Item 10. Item 11. Item 12, consideration of appointment of place number 5 on the Arts Advisory Board. And we had a applicant.
We had a vacancy that only this type of applicant.
Yeah. So.
And so we.
Amy Farley.
And we have Amy.
Yes.
So I'll have Ronnie or Patrick. Either one of you guys make that.
Go for it.
Make the call for that one. Okay. Awesome.
You said make the call, make the motion.
Make the motion to appoint
I'll
Amy.
second.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm working on it. Amy Farley.
Glad we had somebody step up.
Then we have reports. We do have closed session tonight.
Just with the attorney. There's no other economic development or real estate.
just the attorney.
That's going to be enough.
Now that we've reviewed the agenda, let's go ahead and move into item B, discussion of the housing strategy plan, including a housing market value analysis and gap analysis. We have Mr. Colin Weidig, Senior Policy Analyst for the Reinvestment Fund. He's going to be presenting via Zoom. Mr. Weidig, it is your presentation. Take it away.
Hi, well, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to talk to you tonight. And I'm sorry I couldn't be with you in person. I'm going to share my slide. One housekeeping note as I get the share going. Please feel free to interrupt me at any time with any questions that you have. It's a little difficult for me to work the slides and to see you on camera, so please feel free to just speak up and ask me any questions as we talk about the housing strategy plan. So this is an overview of the work that we've been doing, my colleagues at Reinvestment Fund, as well as Maureen from the National Development Council, to collect a whole variety of data about the city of Lewisville's housing market, as well as the economic backdrop for that housing market. And what we've really endeavored to do is to collect a whole variety of data that goes from what you might call the 10,000 foot level, the overview of how the housing market works across the city, down to a very granular address by address, parcel by parcel level, so that we can give you and Ashley and her team and Maureen, as she creates this housing strategy toolkit, as many lenses into the city of Lewisville's housing market as possible to understand how things are working in a whole variety of different levels. And so we've created a variety of different analyses and collected a bunch of different data that's represented on the slide here today, and I'm going to walk through these first 5 things. The first things, we're going to start at that overview level to talk a little bit about economic conditions, but especially housing affordability and housing challenges. So this first slide shows the Department of Housing and Urban Development's income guidelines for the Dallas-Fort Worth-Arlington metro area. And you can see up on this top table, it's grouped by the number of people in the household, whether 1, 2, or 4, and then the percentage of the area median income to give you a sense of what some of those households that have lower income levels can afford, or excuse me, what their incomes are across the metro area. Now, in some cases, HUD's data isn't that representative because it is across the entire metro area. But for the city of Lewisville, your household income is pretty close to that used by HUD across the metro area. So the data in this table is very representative of Lewisville households and what they make at different thresholds of area median income. And the reason that those thresholds are important is because then you can take them and get a sense of what the household can afford at the different income levels. And so that middle chart shows your renters and what is comfortably affordable for them at in terms of a monthly rent at their different income levels. And the way we calculate that is by taking 30% of their monthly income levels for these different household sizes and different levels of area median income to come up with a number of dollars that they can comfortably afford and, for a monthly rent. So it gives you a sense of the variety at the different income levels and the different household sizes. Then this bottom table shows what might be affordable to those same income levels in the home ownership market. What is a home sale price that they could afford?
Colin, I have a quick question. I want to make sure I understand this. The family of 2, these are 2 people, a partner and 2 people cohabitating, and a family of 4 is that 2 children, presumably, is that?
Yeah, that's right. We put family of 2, but it really can be any 2-person household.
Okay.
And the way that the HUD income guidelines work is that they adjust for the number of people in the household under the idea that more people, there's going to be other housing or other non-housing costs like food and things that need to be supported. And so the income guidelines go up the more people there are in the household, so that the subsidy levels also go up as there are more people in the household.
Thank you.
So the big trends that really stand out for Lewisville in recent years, one of the biggest is the recent change in both rents and home sale prices. So this chart is data from Zillow that looks all the way back to 2015 and what they call their observed rent index. Basically, they're indexing based on the different size of rental units so that you get one number for the whole city. And Lewisville is represented in that darkest green line. And it's comparing to other places that are your neighbors in the metro area. And you all see similar patterns in the different cities in your area. What you see is that you had really steady growth in rents for a number of years leading up to the pandemic. And then sometime around early spring of 2021, you see a real inflection in the increase in those rents. And you go from accumulating at a 4 or 5% pace to having grown twice as much in a 2-year period as you had seen in just a 5 or 6 year period before the pandemic. So this has been a real change for people looking to rent in Lewisville. And I should say this data goes through early 2023. If we kept looking out, you'd see that it's sort of flattened out and maybe even gone down just a tiny bit. But for the most part, all those appreciations that you saw in that 2-year period still remain. You see a pretty similar picture when you look at the market for home sales. So the top chart is from a group called Altos Research, which gets the MLS data across the country. And the 4 lines represent different segments of the housing market. So the darkest blue line are the quarter of sales with the highest sale prices in Lewisville. And the red line are the lowest quarter by sale price. And you see that for all different segments of the real estate market, you had slow and steady appreciation for a number of years. And then right around that same time period of early 2021, there's a real inflection point and home sale prices go up quite rapidly. And that's in part due to what we see on the bottom chart here, which is that home sale inventory has been declining year over year, with the exception of a little bit of an increase in the last year. And that's in part because the demand is just much greater than the new supply can keep up with it. So that is what is in part keeping this inflection in home sale prices, where there's been really a big change from what might have been a typical sale price in, say, 2018 or 2019 to what you see in Lewisville's home sale market today. So we took those data about rents and home sale prices, and we compared it to Bureau of Labor Statistics data on what some common occupations earn in Lewisville and across the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And so what you see on the left-hand side here are a bunch of different occupations. These are all some of the more common occupations in the area. The second column represents the 25th percentile of income for those occupations from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And we're using 25% there because that's a common proxy for people that are just starting their careers in these professions. It gives you a sense of people that are looking to enter the housing market because they're just forming new households. And at each of those different income levels, then you can see what the maximum rent, meaning 30% of the monthly income would be, or the maximum home sale price that would be affordable to somebody who's working one of these jobs and making one of those entry-level incomes. And those are important because then you'll see in the last 2 columns whether the typical 1-bedroom apartment or average home sale is affordable currently for these households and people working these occupations. And what you see is that for about half of the people on this chart, the average 1-bedroom is still affordable, but the average home sale prices really become much less affordable, and only the highest income occupations are able to afford the typical home sale in recent years. So that gives you a sense of the current dynamics in the market. Another thing that we've been looking at is what's called the CHAZ data, which is data that looks at housing challenges for households, and it does this by a variety of different demographic characteristics like race and ethnicity and age. It can also break it up by income or household size, and by renters or owners. And what we mean when we say housing problems is one of the following four things, which is that either the household lives in a housing unit that lacks a complete kitchen or lacks complete plumbing facilities, that the household is overcrowded, which means that there is more than one person per room in the household, and finally that the household is housing cost burden, which means that they are paying more than 30% of their income for their monthly housing costs. And so if it's any one of those four things, HUD considers the household to have a housing challenge. So this is some data comparing households in Lewisville that have either the lowest income, so under 30% of AMI, incomes that are a little bit higher than that, 30 to 50%, and then incomes that are in the 50 to 80% range of AMI. And we're looking at different households based on their race and ethnicity. The top tables are representative of renters, and the bottom tables show homeowners. And also we're comparing Lewisville to the Dallas MSA as a whole. And I think the patterns that stand out most on this chart are generally that the lowest income households are the ones that are most likely to have these housing challenges. That's especially true for homeowners. It's actually the case that for renters, the renters under 30% of AMI are a little bit less likely to have housing challenges than some of the renters with slightly higher incomes. And that might be because they're better able to access some affordable housing opportunities, some subsidized rentals like low-income housing tax credit rentals perhaps. And the other thing that stands out is that you see the rates are a little bit higher than across the Dallas MSA as a whole. And so for some of these lower income households in Lewisville, they are experiencing some challenges. And in the broader report, we talk a little bit about what those are. The most common one is that they are facing housing cost burden, that it's very typically the case that housing cost burden scales with income. And so for the lowest income households, they really just have a challenge in keeping up with those monthly housing costs.
Colin, I'm sorry, this is Patrick again. Can you go back 2 slides? There's something about that slide I was trying to unpack in my head. I couldn't figure out what it was. One more, slide 7. Yeah, so the first slide we looked at 2-person income, 2-person households, and 4-person households. This is single person, right? So single incomes aren't usually people buying houses, right? It's usually dual incomes. So this may not be as bad as it appears, because there's going to be a human resource specialist married to or partnered up with a financial risk specialist. So when I look at this at first, I was alarmed. But the reality, I think, is most people buying houses at least two incomes. Is that right?
Oftentimes that's the case, yeah. So you're right that it could be for many of these people, if you put sort of 2 of the people together on the chart, that they would be able to afford something in a way that a single person couldn't afford.
I had a little wave of panic when I saw this chart, and I just wanted to try to figure out why that was. So, okay, thank you. I'm sorry.
Yeah, sure thing. So that's a little bit, there's in the full report, there's a lot more on housing challenges, and breaking them out by, for example, age and household size. And so you can get a real sense of a variety of different people and the challenges they might experience currently in the housing market. So another thing we put together is what we call the market value analysis. And this is a housing market typology that we put together at the census block group level. And the idea with this is that this is really going to give Maureen and Ashley and her team the tools to do really fine-grained interventions where you're looking at areas that are about the 1/5 of the size of a census tract. So we're talking about areas that are somewhere between, say, 250 and 500 households. Really small areas, not quite block to block, but about as close as you can get while still being statistically reliable. And the way we put this together is that we take as much local administrative data as possible, data that the city collects about itself, like permits and code violations and vacancy. We also have home sale data from a vendor called Atom Data, which gives you house-to-house home sale data. And we tag all of that to that census block group geography. We visited a couple times and drove around to make sure that what we were seeing in the data looked the way that housing conditions are on the ground in Lewisville. So we're really checking that data in as fine-grained a way as possible. And then once we had looked at the data and also confirmed it in a couple of meetings with stakeholders, we used what's called a statistical cluster analysis to create the typology. What that is doing is it's taking those block groups and it's putting together those areas that are alike on those things like permitting and home sale prices, and code violations, and separating out areas that are quite different. And so you'll see in a second, I'll show you a map of what the results are of that statistical cluster analysis. So once we had done that analysis, we showed that again to the stakeholder group and got their feedback, made some adjustments based on their experience of what the real estate market looks like in Lewisville, and then finally created some summaries, which I'll show you in just a second. And before going into the results of the analysis, I wanted to talk just a little bit about what we think about are sort of the best practices for how to use this analysis and how to think about this as a tool when you're doing interventions in the housing market. And the first one of those is this idea that public subsidy by itself cannot create a market, that you really want to use subsidy as a way to send a signal to the private market that this is an area that the city is investing in and taking a particular interest in, as a way to pull in some of those private market forces and be able to work together to improve different parts of the city. The next idea is that you'll see that the typology creates different groupings that go from the strongest areas in the city to areas that might have more challenges. And what we're specifically advocating is that you use it to think about what the data says are the best way to invest in each of the different types of places. And so therefore that you invest in all types of places throughout the city. And when in doing that in some of the markets that have more challenges, perhaps they have more vacancy or code violations, we advocate what's called a build from strength approach. And that means that you look at what are some of the strengths in the area. That could be a strong community group. It could be a light rail station or a strong commercial corridor. It could really be a whole variety of things that you look at and say, we're going to anchor off of this strong area and help pull off of this strength to build for the area as a whole. And along that idea is the idea that you want to invest in all places because really all the residents are consumers with an expectation of high quality public services and amenities. And finally, our last way of thinking about this is simply that the best decisions when you're thinking about this set of tools that you're going to get from the National Development Council are based on objective analysis of sound data. And so that's what we've been collecting for the last 6 months to provide for you in this housing market typology. So the things on the right-hand side here are all the different components that go into the typology. We've got measures of the typical home sale price in the last couple of years, as well as the variation in that home sale price. We've got measures of investment that come from your permit data, where people are making significant reinvestment in their homes or where new construction activity is happening. We've got some measures of distress in the market, things like foreclosures, code violations. Specifically, we looked at code violations that relate to the structure of the building on the parcel, as well as vacant residential addresses data, which comes from the U.S. Postal Service. That is quarterly data that's collected by the mail carriers themselves, so it's really up-to-date data. And then there are a few other components that are helpful characteristics to know about the area, which are things like the mix of owners and renters, the density, which means really like what are the housing types? Are they primarily single-family homes or large multifamily developments? And the last component is the share of renter households that have some kind of renter subsidy, which in your case is primarily folks that live in low income housing tax credit developments. As I mentioned, we traveled a couple times and drove around Lewisville to make sure that all these different data are representative of the actual conditions currently on the ground in the city. And so you can see on the left-hand side, those that sort of black line that you see there is we have a GPS on top of the car, and as we drive around, we just collect our tracks. And those are all the different places that we drove to better understand your housing market when we visited in March. So the result of collecting all that data and running a statistical cluster analysis is that we identified these 7 market types. And so what the statistical cluster analysis is doing here is it's taking all those different components that we just talked about, which are listed across the columns on the top here, and it's statistically separating out the different areas so that they're as alike as possible on all those different components, as well as very different from other areas that might have, say, similar sale prices or similar levels of foreclosure or something like that. And so the way you can use this chart is that you can go across the columns for a particular area that you're interested in and understand what are the typical characteristics for an area that's in that cluster. And then along the bottom are some of the average values across the city for the block groups, so you get a comparative sense. So just as a quick example, if you look at these light blue areas, which we have as the C block groups, they have prices that are about typical for the city as a whole. They have a higher share of homeowners. They have the highest share of homeowners across the city of all the different areas in Lewisville. They also, I think, is a really good story is that they have the highest share of permanent activity. So these are areas where homeowners are really choosing to reinvest in their homes. They do have a little bit of the code violations, and their foreclosure levels are about typical for the city, although I would say the city has very low foreclosure activity in general. There is no subsidy in the rental markets because these are primarily single family areas, which you can tell by this last column, which says the density of the areas. It's the lowest density areas because it's primarily single family homes. So then this map shows...
Sorry, before you move on, I have a question on that slide.
Sure.
So I love the numbers on here. I got excited looking at these numbers. I had a couple questions. So the first question that I have is, these are medians on the left, median home sales?
Yeah, so what we do for this chart is we take all the different block groups, and our measure of the typical home sale price is the median home sale price for that block group. But because our unit of analysis is the block group, these numbers are actually the average value for all the block groups in that particular category.
So it's not the median, it's the mean?
It's in this case, it's the mean of the median, if that makes sense.
Right, that's where I was challenging here actually, because when I look at the gaps between G and F, F and E, E and D, it's $20,000, $30,000, but that gap between B and A is $300,000. So if we're taking an average of the medians, I would assert that, I'm just curious why we did that rather than a median of the medians. Because it makes a big difference in here, right? The median of the medians is $345,000. So it makes a big difference as to what those numbers look like.
Right. Yeah, we could certainly recalculate this as the median of the medians, and I can look and see if there's like particular block groups that are skewing those calculations. I do think those, that big difference that you see for those A block groups, when you look at those on the map, that we did observe on the ground that those are places that just have significantly different home sale prices than other parts of the city.
Right, and that leads, since those are outliers, that leads me more to look at a median rather than a mean. But anyway, I was just curious. I thought maybe there was a reason for it that I just wasn't aware of. So I didn't want to challenge the process. Just wanted to know if there's a reason for it.
Sure, and I should say that in the actual cluster analysis, it is the median value that's being used for each of the block groups.
Okay.
It's a table that just represents the summary statistics for the cluster as a whole. So for the C block groups, it's for all 21 of those block groups. But
when you look at those bands, though, I mean, you see what I'm talking about, right? It's 30,000 between each band till you get to A to B, then it's a huge jump of 300,000. So a median might be a better, median of the medians might be better than the average of the medians.
Yeah, we can definitely adjust the
that's
chart.
not right. We're not doing it here, but that's not right. Send me a quick email about why that's not the right thing to do. I'm open to learning.
Yeah, I think we'll calculate it that way as well, and we can look at the chart and see what it looks like then. But I think it would be interesting to see. You can definitely make that adjustment though, because I can see your point. Yeah, it's big. That could really skew these, especially top block groups where you have quite a range of sales. You have some sales that go over $1 million in those places. And so this is the resulting map of the typology. And so it's important to note that each of the clusters represent, or excuse me, each of the colors represent one of the clusters that was identified in the analysis, and that the clusters themselves have similar values. So when you see a light blue block group that's in the northwest part of the city or further south, even though they're geographically in different areas, you'd expect them to have very typical values along all those different components that go into the statistical cluster analysis. And importantly, different values than you would see in, for example, the green areas or the yellow areas. There are also a few areas where, based on some feedback from the stakeholder group, we split the census geographies because they were essentially averaging over two areas that were quite different. For example, in Old Town, we split a couple of the block groups so that we could better characterize those areas rather than averaging two places that are quite different that just happen to be drawn together by the Census Bureau. And so some of the, if you're familiar with census block groups in Lewisville, you might see some shapes that are a little different than you'd expect. And in those cases, we've actually split along major roads or other places that are big dividers in the market. And that's based on the feedback that we got from the stakeholder group. Okay, were there any other questions about the market value analysis before we move on to the gap analysis? The last thing I wanted to say about is the real goal of the market value analysis is to give you, a fine-grained look at the geography of markets across the city. So when you're thinking of all these different tools that you're going to have in this toolkit from NDC, you can really suit those tools to specific markets and what the data is showing about the strengths or challenges of those particular areas. So the last set of things that I wanted to talk about today was the gap analysis and some household growth projections that'll give you a sense of how much housing development you might need over some 5-year periods going forward. The first thing is this gap analysis, and what we've done here is take census microdata that's provided by a group called IPMS USA, which is data from the 2017 to 2021 American Community Survey, and IPMS provides de-identified survey responses and then weights them so that you can reconstruct the survey. And with that, you can actually match households based on their income levels to their actual housing costs. And so the demand is represented by the number and share of households and whether they're owners or renters at different thresholds of that area median income. Then the supply is based on the actual housing costs that households in Lewisville paid as of that 21 ACS. And so the housing costs we're talking about for owners are what's called select monthly owner costs, which include things like taxes and insurance, as well as utilities. And in cases where there's condo fees, those as well. And then for renters, it's what's called median gross rent. And it's called gross rent because it also includes utilities if the renter is responsible for paying utilities as well as the rent. I did want to mention, because this is the 2021 American Community Survey, which was the most recent data available, that the data doesn't include Castle Hills because that was brought into the city after these data were collected. But we can take this measure of demand and this measure of supply and look at where there might be gaps for either owners or renters at different thresholds of AMI. So this is the overall picture of households and housing units at different income levels and costs across the city. The lowest income households are represented by the purple bars on this chart. The households that are at a little bit above those lowest income levels, 50 to 80% of AMI, are the blue bars on the chart. Middle income households that are either a little bit below or a little bit above area median income are in green, and the highest income households are in the gray on the chart. And just for reference, because now we're talking about 2021 data. On the bottom left, you see a little table that'll show you what these different AMI levels represent for different sizes of households. So the way this chart works is on the left-hand side, we've got the number of households that are in each of these different income groups. The middle bars are the number of housing units that are affordable at the maximum of that income. And then finally, on the right-hand side, you see the gap between these two numbers. So for example, for those lowest income households, there are about a little over 7,700 of those households in the city. There are about 7,200 housing units that are affordable at that income. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean they are matched to those households, but that they are affordable at that income. And so that results in a gap of about 550 housing units overall that are affordable at that income level. You see the largest surplus of units at the two middle income levels, so those that are just above the lowest incomes, and then the middle income households that are around 80 to 120% of AMI. And in 2021, where you really saw the biggest deficit was that there are many households that have this highest income level, but there weren't too many housing units that had costs that were only affordable to the highest income households. So very likely those households were paying costs that were very affordable because they were paying for one of these housing units that were in the green bars or the blue bars. So that's the overall picture. When we break it out by home ownership, first we're going to look at homeowners. And in this case, we see that homeowners are predominantly in that highest income group, almost 10,000 homeowners compared to just about 8,000 that are in all the other income groups combined. But the homeownership opportunities actually don't have the same expenses as you would expect to see based on these income profiles. So many homes are affordable to people that were making less than 50% of AMI. Now that's probably in part because those people had already paid off their mortgage or had refinanced into a very low rate mortgage, so that their housing costs were quite low even though they own their home. And so for homeowners, the biggest gap was for those most expensive homeownership units. One other thing I want to say about that is that's again based on 2021 data. And like we saw at the beginning of the presentation, this has changed quite a bit in recent years. And so this is reflective of where the homeownership market was in 2021. But for households that are looking to own a home now, this might be a bit of a different picture. You're going to see many more housing units that are at those highest costs. Also, because Castle Hills is now part of the city, that's another area where you would see a lot of units at that highest housing cost. But as of the most recent American Community Survey data, there was a shortage of those highest cost homeownership units. The rental market looks pretty different than the homeownership market. For renters, you see that incomes are spread pretty much evenly across all our different groups. We've got somewhere between 6,000 and 6,500 households in each of the different income groups. But rental units are really concentrated in those middle income and just below middle income categories in terms of their gross costs. There are very few units that are affordable to those lowest income households. And so that's one of the biggest gaps that you see in the rental market, is that there's really a shortage of rental housing that's affordable to those lowest income renters. But there also are not a ton of what you might call luxury rental units, and so there's a gap at the top of the market as well. And the one concerning part about that is that might cause those highest income renters to essentially compete with those people in the middle for rental units, which could in turn cause those folks to have a harder time finding units that match well with their incomes where they can afford that 30%.
Was there a surplus of houses on the previous slide for the lowest income level? Yeah, so that's interesting. So you start thinking about how do you move the renters into home ownership in that banner. Am I thinking about that wrong?
Yeah, well, one thing I would say about it is its housing costs, rather than like actual current for sale prices. And so really one of the ways that homeowners get into that lowest cost is that they pay off their mortgage or they refinance their mortgage at one of those rates that was available for a couple of years there. And so it's a lot harder to say currently that there are that many units that are for sale right now at those prices. And we have a little bit about that in the report. I think for those lowest cost homeownership units, something like 3 or 4% of the sales in the last couple of years were at that level. So, but I know there are some townhomes and other opportunities that are coming online that'll be likely more affordable for folks at those income levels, and that might be homeownership opportunities.
That's it. That's the only question I had, sir. If you're waiting for me, thank you.
Now, did that make sense though about why it's a little bit different because we're looking at actual costs instead of current first prices?
It makes no sense for me here. I may want to think about that a little bit. I may reach out to you and get a little more education on that.
Okay, yeah, I'd be happy to talk about
Thank
that.
you.
Sure. So we talked about renters. The last set of things that I wanted to talk about was we took some data from the Texas Demographic Center, which gives projections for many years going forward about growth at the county level in population. And the Texas Demographic Center is projecting that Denton County is going to double in population from 2020 to 2042. So we took that data and looked at the share of new Denton County residents that have moved to Lewisville in the last couple censuses, as well as some American Community Survey data, and found that generally it was about 6 to 8% of new Denton County residents moved to the city of Lewisville. And we took those population projections for the county and multiplied it by the share of new residents that moved to Lewisville, and that's what gives us these population projections going forward for the city that are on the bottom right-hand side. So you can see you had a big jump in residents when Castle Hills was annexed, which increased the city by a little under 20% of new residents. And then you're essentially going to add almost a whole new Castle Hills in population every 5 years for the foreseeable future, according to this Texas Demographic Center data. And so you can expect that much growth going forward in a 5-year period. I think the good news is that it's steady, and so it's something that you can certainly plan for because you're getting these waves of people in a very steady way over time. You can also see on the map on the left-hand side that you're part of one of the most swiftly growing areas of the country, and you are right in the middle of that growth. That spatially, you're right in the middle of it. Most of the growth that's going on in the area is in the north of Dallas, north of Fort Worth, and some of the most swiftly growing parts of the area are to your north and east, as well as to your west. And Lewisville is growing right in the middle in terms of rate of all the different municipalities in the DFW area. So you're a steadily growing part of a strongly growing region, and based on this data from the Texas Demographic Center, you can expect that to continue for many years to come. We did break these out a little bit. We took that American Community Survey data and we looked at people that moved to Lewisville in the last year in that American Community Survey data. And we compared their incomes to people that had lived in the city at the time of the American Community Survey. So that's what I mean by in-migrants here. These are people that moved to the city when they responded to the American Community Survey. And you can see that they do have a little bit different of an income profile than existing residents do. They tend to be spread out pretty close to evenly across those different thresholds of AMI that we looked at, about a quarter in each of the groups, a little bit more in the high income group than in the other groups, but not nearly as much as are the current residents, which are 40% or more making those highest incomes. So when you take those population projections and think of them as being like these people that moved to Lewisville in the past year in the American Community Survey, This chart on the right gives you a sense of how many new households at each of those different income levels you would expect, as long as the profile of people moving to Lewisville stays essentially the same as what we saw in the data going back. So it gives you a sense of how many new households, which means how many new housing units at different levels of AMI you might expect to need going forward. Okay, I think that was all. I actually have a couple more slides if we have just a little bit of time. Just a little bit more on that gap analysis. We also broke it out by race or ethnicity and tenure, so you can see cost burden for different groups by race or ethnicity in the city. And generally what you see is that renters are more likely to be cost burdened than homeowners, about twice as likely, regardless of which racial or ethnic group you're looking at. But in particular, you see that Black and Hispanic renters are a little bit more likely to be cost burdened than our white non-Hispanic renters. And Hispanic homeowners are, in particular, more likely to be cost burdened than the other racial groups that are represented here. And I should say other represents mostly people that identify as multi-ethnic, as well as in a few cases, people who identify as American Indian. Then I think the last slide I have for you is, this is breaking out rates of cost burden for seniors and non-senior households. And you see that seniors are in general more likely to be cost burdened. Senior renter households are particularly likely to be cost burdened in almost 2/3 of cases. But on the right-hand side, you'll see that that also really is a function of income, that it's that there are many low-income senior renter households, and they're particularly likely to be housing cost burdened. Okay, so that's just an overview of all the different data we've been collecting and providing to Maureen as she creates the housing plan and the toolkit that'll go along with that, and to Ashley and her colleagues. So if you have any other questions, I'm happy to answer any or talk about anything that we didn't talk about tonight that'll be included in the report.
And just to clarify, so phase 2 of this is bringing a toolkit to council that kind of takes all of this data, and Maureen's working on that with us right now. We just wanted to have more time with our finance team to look through that to make sure it's a financially stable plan. We'll be bringing it to you guys for review in the future.
Colin, when you think about homeowner cost burden, especially among seniors, what's the major component of that? Is it property taxes? Is it they're buying houses when they're 55 and they can't afford it? Do you have insight into what causes that cost burden for seniors?
We didn't look specifically at that. I will say that in general, property taxes are the most common, but I can do an analysis. I'm pretty sure with that micro data, I'm able to break out the costs a little bit, so I can look specifically at those senior homeowners for you and see what the big drivers of the costs are for them.
That'd be great.
And we'll put that in the report for sure.
That's helpful, thanks. Gives us
Sure.
a place to look.
Any other questions, comments?
Really good.
Yeah, looking forward to next steps and what we can take with the data. Patrick, your analytics will be great to kind of give some insight, so I look forward to seeing what you come up with.
What analytics I gotta do? I can
Yeah,
do something.
I mean, get in there, get in there. Give me a spreadsheet.
This is really good.
So, no, I think at the end of all this process, we have a better understanding of where we are and where we may need to be. Some of the things that concern me are just the data. We've had so much of a change in the last 2 years, and of course, AMI and those are not keeping up, which we're seeing that in our seniors where the AMI is actually part of their benefit structure, and it's not keeping up either. So I would, as we're going through this, let us know, where that data may be a little bit shaky based on today's realities versus the data set that we have to pull from. I think would be important for me to look at. So thank you, appreciate all the work. I've been very excited to see this come to fruition. So appreciate it.
Sure. Thank you for having me.
Okay. James, do we need to give you a moment to re-engineer electronics, or are we good?
Hopefully, we're ready to go.
Well, next up is our legislative update. Of course, we have Randy Bird here with Bird Consultancy and Mr. Kunke, part of our legislative team.
Okay, a very quick intro before Brandon gets up and walks you through this. In your packet, you have the full spreadsheet. There were 250 some odd bills affecting cities that passed during this year's regular session. About 50 of them will have some sort of impact on Lewisville, most of them relatively minor. Brandy and I went through the list with Claire's input as well and came up with around 15 that we think will have either significant impact on Lewisville, or they result in a policy or ordinance change that will come to you at some point for review, or they are directly related to one of the legislative priorities that council selected a year ago. So those are the ones we highlighted, but you have the full spreadsheet of 50 or so bills in your packet, in your backup, and we certainly are able to answer questions on those if you have any. So unless you want to start with any more of an introduction, I'm going to get out of the way and let Randy do her thing.
Thank you, James. Thank you, Mayor and Council. So, as James mentioned, I'm just going to try to give you the highlights from this session, and I want to leave plenty of time for questions because I know you may have some. And so we'll just jump right into this. I want to say that Lewisville had a very successful legislative session this session, and I want to just have a little bit of a point of personal privilege. Your staff is amazing to work with. The session is very difficult for city staff and for a lot of cities because things come very quickly. You have to react really quickly, and your staff is great about taking my phone calls. They might be really pleased that they no longer have to take my phone call now that the session is over because they're busy running in a lot of directions, and so I appreciate how amazing they are to work with, and that definitely leads to our success because we did make some decisions on the fly that really led to some of these things being able to accomplish some of your priorities. So council approved 9 priorities. That was the last time that I was before you, is when we were working on your legislative agenda. You chose 9 priority issues, the first of which was allowing cities to further regulate massage establishments. So this was the one proactive piece of legislation that we were working on this session. And we were ultimately able to get this language passed. It was a challenge. It was a very circuitous path. We owe a lot of thanks to Representative Timish, especially, and her chief of staff, who were absolutely tenacious on this issue. They were determined to get this bill passed. And then Representative Bumgarner also spent a lot of time on this issue. And ultimately, what we were able to do, the bill faced some opposition that we were surprised by along the way. We felt like when this process started that this was really common sense public policy and it was going to be a slam dunk. And we should have known that nothing is that easy in the legislative process. And so there was quite a bit of opposition. We dealt with those at each step in the process. We worked on amendment language and amended the bill in order to address those concerns. The governor's office expressed some concerns. Massage school owner that was very, very vocal with all of our legislative delegations. So it was certainly a process. Ultimately, the biggest challenge that we had was with the Senate Business and Commerce Committee chair. We could not get Representative Timish's bill scheduled for a hearing, and that's when we pivoted and put the language in an amendment on Representative Bumgarner's bill, and that's how we eventually got it passed. So House Bill 3579 by Representative Bumgarner ultimately has our language included as part of it, but Representative Timish very much was a part of that strategy and worked really hard to get that language on, and then Senator Tan Parker as well. So we have all of them to thank for having accomplished this, and it was very much a group effort. And then the next issue, priority issue that was on your legislative agenda was destination sourcing, sales tax sourcing. This is an issue that's come up multiple sessions for us. Councilmember Kelly came down to Austin and testified on this bill. He did a great job at that hearing. Your staff also worked on quite a few other witnesses to make sure that all of the different aspects and impacts of this bill were well represented at the hearing. It was House Bill 5089 by Representative Morgan Meyer, And there was not a companion bill in the Senate, and that was the same for last session as well. So this is very much Representative Meyer pushing this issue. It did come out of committee, mainly because it's his committee, he's the chairman. And so obviously there were pressure amongst the House members to vote this out of committee, but it never made it out of House calendars, it never made it to the House floor. So in the big scheme of things, it didn't go very far in the process. This is an issue that we expect will continue to come up in future sessions, and so something that we're gonna have to keep fighting. James, you jump in whenever you're ready, please, as I'm going along here, jump in. The next priority issue on your legislative agenda was school safety funding. And so House Bill 3 by Representative Burrows and Senator Nichols did pass. This bill has more to do with some of the requirements of school districts as related to school safety, but there is an impact to the city. It does require a school safety officer on every campus, but the way that the language is drafted, the city will be made whole and won't have any issues there. School districts that are going to have a challenge in ensuring that they fund that aspect.
Randy, on that recovering expenses, is that in perpetuity or is that only for a couple of years? The reason I ask is I sat down with our ISD board president, and she expressed that, yeah, they pay for 25% of this for a couple of years, and then it's all on the ISDs. So,
I mean, obviously, the legislature can appropriate more funding for that in future sessions, but I'm sure the school districts are concerned that they won't, and I think that's a real valid concern.
and on ours, is it a partial recovery? Is it a full recovery, and how long?
So the way the language is drafted is basically the city is made whole. So
Okay.
that's a concern of the school district.
Thank you.
And the bill does take effect September 1st. And then there's lots of other requirements there about what school districts need to do in order to coordinate with local law enforcement as a part of that bill as well.
The good thing is those last two bullets, LISD's been doing that with our police department. They work well with us on that. So that's not a change for us.
The difference there, though, is right now we share an officer among multiple campuses, and we now have to do one-to-one.
So I think we're working through that with the ISD, but I've heard other options where they're not, they don't have to hire a school resource officer. They can have, they can hire their own personnel as kind of like security. And so I think there's some discussion of, mainly because of our staffing levels right now. with
Right,
police. So
that's my biggest, where are you gonna find that many officers, period?
Did I say that correctly, police department?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
The next issue, priority issue for the city was affordable housing. And there were just a couple of bills that impacted this issue during the legislative session. And I think just in general, big picture, the legislature very much views this as a local issue, not a state issue, which is why you don't see very many bills affecting affordable housing at the legislative level. But House Bill 2910 by Representative Johnson, it would have allowed a city to establish a rent control ordinance, and that bill did not even receive a hearing in House committee. So I only point that out so that you kind of have a feel for how those issues are perceived at the legislature. And then this was really the big issue, House Bill 2071 related to public facility corporations. So this was really the big bill related to affordable housing this session, and it was a negative one. It started out as a positive. The intent was there have been some abuses of PFCs in the Houston area, and they were trying to put some reforms in place to maintain this as a tool. That bill definitely got derailed along the way, and at one point it would have basically prohibited PFCs, but it was ultimately changed and passed back in its almost original form so that there are some reforms, that were passed as part of that legislation, but it does allow PFCs as a tool to continue.
And just to buttress that, so what we've been doing in the affordable levels that we've been providing in kind of the negotiations we've talked through with the council would generally meet all of their revisions. It was, like Brandy said, some of those outliers that were really using this as an economic development tool rather than affordable housing tool.
Absolutely. And then the next issue on your agenda was some reform of hiring and separation processes for police. And this has been a priority for the Police Chiefs Association for a number of sessions. So there was some portion of this that passed in the T-Cole Sunset Bill. So Senate Bill 1445 by Senator Paxton did pass. And this was the Texas Commission on Law Enforcement. It's their sunset bill that took place this session. And so the bill did implement some reforms. It replaces the F5 form with a new mandatory process, which is a positive thing. Not everything that the Police Chiefs Association wanted, but certainly a step in the right direction. And then the next issue was preserving the voice of local governments, and so this is the better known as taxpayer-funded lobbying issue. Senate Bill 175 by Senator Middleton, it did pass the Senate. It would have prohibited entities from having representation in Austin. It also would have impacted TML and the Texas Association of Counties. The bill passed the Senate and then never received a hearing in House committee. So it never proceeded at all on the House side, but did pass the Senate pretty quickly, which is what we expected based on previous sessions. So nothing unexpected there.
And this will continue to be an issue. Senator Middleton filed this bill when he was a House member several sessions, and he apparently will continue filing it. So it will come back in 2 years.
And then the next issue on your priority list was property tax relief. And as you all know, there were 100 bills, over 100 bills that were filed during the session that would impact property taxes and try to implement some kind of property tax relief. And then if you've been paying attention to the news, we've had good news since we finalized this presentation as of late last week. But the House and the Senate both passed the property tax relief package late last week, and that bill is headed to the governor's desk shortly and will implement both a increase in the homestead exemption and then also compression on the school district M&O tax rates.
And I'll add here that one of the biggest concerns we had was the House's preference was to lower the appraisal cap and apply the appraisal cap to all real properties, residential, commercial, which would have had a tremendous impact on how we gather our revenue. What they ultimately approved did not have that, but it does have what they're calling a circuit breaker for 20% increases for commercial properties. And I don't have the details of how that's going to work out, but it's a trial, so they've called it. And this is their pilot program to see if the circuit breaker system works. So we will see appraisal caps come back up again in 2 years as well.
So when does this take effect? Does it affect the numbers that we get this month?
No,
So
they
it'll
missed their
be
deadline.
Next tax cycle.
Right.
next year.
Because this has to be approved by the voters in November.
Okay.
It involves a constitutional amendment. So.
Okay.
The raising of the homestead exemption requires a constitutional amendment, so you'll see it on the November ballot.
That's from what, 30 to 100?
20 to
40 to
100.
40 to 100. From 40 up to 100,000.
Well, 24, 25. It goes
Next
to
year.
effect in 25.
Yes. And then the next issue on your legislative agenda was elections, and it really focused, your priority issue focused on keeping local elections in May. There were a number of bills filed that would have done that, but none that passed, none really progressed through the process at all. But there was one elections bill that we want to make sure that you're aware of that did pass, and that's House Bill 3613 by Representative Kane. And so what it does is basically say after a redistricting cycle, all the council seats have to be placed on that following ballot. So
See, that is
will
just
be-
crazy. How dangerous is that?
It is.
And then you have to start the staggering, so we're all going to be on the ballot at the same time.
In 2032,
And then everything starts, well, if we're here in
What's interesting is the origins of this bill. There was a lawsuit filed in Arlington when they redistricted after the census. And a couple of voters, their district changed. Their new representative was not on the ballot that year, so they filed claiming they were not getting fair representation. They lost, but this bill applied what they were wanting to do. This will require a charter amendment to reestablish the stagger after that 2032 election. So that's why it's on here mainly, is this is going to come back through a charter process.
Just note that I'm going to retire right
She just said,
I wish all of you luck when we're gone.
There's a lot of legislative sessions between now and 2030.
Yes, there
Keep
is.
that in mind. So there are opportunities to tweak that as necessary.
This truly was a left field bill. Had no clue it was coming along, and all of a sudden it passed a committee hearing. Like, well, maybe we should watch this, and then it flew through after that.
Yes, as things sometimes do. So this was the final issue on your priority list, and that was to increase or to provide some sort of state funding for public transportation. And I just wanted to give you an update on this as well. So there were 4 bills filed that would have impacted this issue. One of them got a hearing in the House Committee, HJR 77 by Representative Wally. And the House Committee Chairman is supportive of this issue, Representative Canales from the Valley. He believes in a broader transportation system, but the other 3 bills that were filed did not even get a committee hearing. So that just gives you a little feel for how this issue fares in this current legislative environment. And then, of course, the big bill that passed this session, the preemption bill, that I would be remiss if we didn't talk about. We certainly weren't necessarily expecting this, was not on your priority list initially when we first set your legislative agenda. But one that has been much talk of conversation. So House Bill 2127 by Representative Burrows did pass this session. We were able to get an amendment put on that exempts the massage regulations. So early in the session, we talked and felt very strongly that this bill had a high likelihood of passage and wanted to make sure that our priority issue, the massage regulation bill, if it passed, would not be negated by this bill. And so Representative Timish worked on an amendment and was able to get that on in the House. So to ensure that our legislation was still able to continue. And then after we talked and city staff, Claire and James, worked with your department directors to do an initial review of all of your ordinances to see what impact this legislation could have, and found, at least in that initial review, very minimal impact. And I think that's a big compliment to staff, that the city has not gone much beyond what's already authorized by state law. So this bill really has more minimal impact on the city of Lewisville than some of the other larger communities like Dallas and Austin that have taken some of these issues much further. And then the other real positive piece of this legislation is it requires 3 months' notice before a lawsuit can be filed, because I think initially a lot of the concern from cities around the state was really the lawsuit issue. But if you have 3 months' notice, it gives the city an opportunity to either amend or repeal that ordinance. And so that also should give you some comfort that this bill may not have as large of an impact as we initially thought.
The city of Houston has filed a lawsuit against this, claiming that it violates some provisions of the state constitution that only allow the legislature to void specific ordinances with specific harm. And this is field preemption. San Antonio looks likely to join the lawsuit. Dallas says, and Fort Worth say they won't. I don't know. But Houston has filed that suit. We'll see what happens in the courts.
Is Denton
Pardon?
Is Denton
It
joining?
wouldn't surprise me, but right now Houston's the only one. They filed it, and it was a very lengthy and well-written, I think, suit that was filed almost immediately after, so that they were ready. And it's funny, they didn't say anything really during the session, but they were ready at the end.
Has Austin spoke up about this?
A lot.
Yeah, I thought so.
A lot. Austin feels like they're the target of this. TML legislative staff feels like this bill, based on who filed it, it was Burrows, that this bill was really intended to go after local regulation of payday lending and puppy mills. And these are bills that have been filed in past sessions but failed, really didn't go anywhere. And usually when that happens, you see the author try to get more narrow. This time they went big and it passed. And there's only a handful of specific areas that cities are basically kicked out of in the bill, and those are 2 of them. It does keep current regulation, but not any new regulation. Beyond that, if you had a chance to see the hearing when it was in the House committee, a lot of people walked up and said, we don't know if it's going to affect us or not, and they asked the author, will it affect us? And he said, I don't know, we'll see. So we're nervous.
It was very
about this bill.
comical, but just Unreal.
So the 3 months though, it does give the opportunity, if a business notifies the city, we're going to sue you because this provision we don't think is legal, we have 3 months to look at it, and if we agree with them, we can take action, and if not, that's Liz's purview. I'm going to stop.
Absolutely. This was very much a philosophical issue for the House author and the members who carried this bill. Was certainly aimed at cities that they felt like were impacting businesses with multiple regulations in multiple cities across the state, and they felt like there needed to be uniformity. So that's their reasoning, their words, not mine.
I guess that
That's their
author
reasoning
was
for why.
not ever on the city council.
I'm sorry.
Mr. Burns? No.
I'm going to guess that author was never on the city
You
council.
are correct.
But the NFIB and a couple other business groups were recruited and supported this bill pretty heavily, and that's often a quick way to get passage in the House.
Absolutely. And then just a couple of other bills that we want to make sure and cover so you'll understand what the impacts could be for the city of Lewisville. And I'll cover these quickly because I want to get to more of your questions. But Texas State Technical College, this is another issue that wasn't anticipated before the session but came up during, and a great opportunity for Lewisville. So House Bill 3287 did pass. It allows a TSTC campus to be built in Denton County. The legislation authorizes a campus in Denton County. It's not yet funded. There is an endowment bill that was attempted by TSTC in this last session, and there was a lot of support for it, but it died in the final days of the session. And so TSTC has been working on the governor's office to add this to a future special session call. So there may be another opportunity over the interim on the funding side.
And to be clear, they don't have that today. What they want to do is create an endowment so that they can have it moving forward for facilities. So the facility is passed for Denton County, but they would have to fund it in their traditional way, which is where they work through government, local businesses to get a campus built.
Absolutely, and the mayor was very active on this issue and was down in Austin testifying on this bill many times, and very much appreciate his support on this. It's a great opportunity for Denton County. The next bill that passed is the hot tax bill, House Bill 5105 by Representative Stuckey. So this bill institutes a 2% hot tax countywide in Denton County. This was very much a priority of Judge Eads and the county. It literally passed at 1 a.m. on the last day that it could possibly pass by a lot of will from the judge. So that bill did pass and does go into effect September 1. The other bill that we wanted to talk about is landfill regulation. So House Bill 1598 by Representative Darby. This bill did pass. It no longer requires a local permit before a landfill permit is issued by the state, but it does retain the city's zoning authority, and we were able to get an amendment added that exempts existing landfills. So much work done on this legislation. We also felt that this one was one the House author potentially didn't understand how this will work from a practical standpoint, worked hard to convince them and educate them on what that process will look like. And Claire worked heavily on this legislation as well. And then right to farm bills. So there were quite a few right to farm bills that came up this legislative session. And this is potentially James's favorite topic. He was absolutely right that this was going to be a big issue in this legislative session, and it most certainly was. So the most significant one that passed is House Bill 1750 by Representative Burns, and it restricts cities from regulating land that's used for agricultural operations. There are some exceptions to that, so the city can impose a maximum height for vegetation that as long as it is at least 12 inches. And then we were successful in getting an amendment on the bill that creates a 10-foot buffer around public rights-of-way. And then there is some unintended or some maybe unanticipated consequences to this that even TML didn't realize at the time that this legislation was going through the process. So there were other bills that attempted to do this, and TML was really focused there and didn't realize that the broad nature of this language actually allows no limits on the quantity or the lot size related to poultry and livestock. And that, like I said, is something that not even TML realized was an impact of this legislation until after the session. But the way the language is written, it puts the burden on the A&M AgriLife extension to create a manual of best practices in agriculture, and the legislation basically directs to that manual. And so we will have an opportunity, and TML is very active on this issue, in making sure that that manual and those best practices will prohibit anything ridiculous from coming out of this legislation.
The opportunity there is most of the provisions of all three right to farm bills that passed are tied to a legitimate agricultural operation. Now, none of them define that, but they all tie it to a legitimate agricultural operation, and then AgriLife is now charged with creating those definitions. So our hope is that somewhere in those definitions it will, prevent someone from having 17 cows on their half-acre residential lot. So if you have friends at the AgriLife, call them. Chris's team is very heavily involved in researching our current ordinances. We're going to have to make some changes, we know, on the mowing ordinance, for example. And they're watching closely to see what AgriLife tells us we have to do. Right
Do we
now,
have a deadline in which to make those?
I don't recall there being a deadline either, but we will be monitoring that process very closely and making sure that when there's input opportunities, because there will be, that you're well aware if council wants to comment.
I think all three bills were September 1 effective.
Yes.
I think, but there's no way they'll have their work done by September 1st. And for those who know me, you'll be shocked by this right now. I love Aggies. They're my best friends. And I'm pulling for them. I really am.
And then there were quite a few land use economic development bills. I think it's more important, or some of the more important ones are the ones that didn't pass this session, but the ones that did. This will certainly be a big topic of conversation next session. A lot of big fights that we anticipate coming back, like the HUD code manufactured homes and minimum lot size or very minimal lot size. All of those issues we expect will be back next session, and so we'll be prepared for those and watching for those. But there were a couple that passed this session that could have an impact, and so wanted to make sure that you're aware of those. The first is the platting shot clock bill, so House Bill 3699 by Representative Wilson. And there are some good provisions as a part of this bill, and not as much impact to the city of Lewisville because you're already meeting the timelines and deadlines as a part of this. But there's one piece that could have an impact, and we wanted to make sure that you're aware of. The way that this legislation is written, you can no longer require dedications of right-of-way for a subdivision or for future streets within a subdivision if it's not already funded by the city. And so there's some question of those definitions as part of that bill, and something that staff is working through.
So that's I was going to say, so that's a pretty big deal, because if you look at our thoroughfare plan, when someone's developing a piece of property, you would ask them to dedicate a piece of property for future development of the road that's on your thoroughfare plan. So if we're not ready to pull the trigger on funding, that's where it gets, we need to look into it, but those are the risks associated with it.
And there may be workarounds as well. Some funding may qualify under the definition, so some things for staff to work through on that, and that's an issue that will probably be coming back to you at some future point. And then another good bill, Senate Bill 543 by Senator Blanco, it allows cities to transfer real property as part of a 380 agreement. That's not something that you've had the authority to do in the past, and there have been some workarounds as part of that, but now you specifically have that authority. So I wanted to just highlight a few good bills that passed this session instead of all the negative ones. And then there was a bill that passed related to non-conforming uses. This is Senate Bill 929. This was a bill by Senator Tam Parker. And so it does impact the proactive rezoning in Old Town that y'all have been discussing, and there will be some amendments to the city's ordinances that are required. Basically, what this bill focuses on is if the city determines that a use that has been grandfathered is no longer conforming, then this bill gives property owners some additional notice and some additional compensation requirements that didn't exist in statute previously. And then just a couple that I'll touch on real quickly, and then we'll open it up for any additional questions. House Bill 1922, and these are all 4 bills that passed, and will have some impact on the city, and so I wanted to touch on them real briefly. It requires that building permit fees be reauthorized every 10 years, and city staff has been talking about how to address that. So James, you want to comment?
Rather than just have some kind of complicated spreadsheet for every fee when it's adopted and track 10 years and stagger them, probably the easiest fix is every year during budget, bring you the whole fee schedule to just reapprove, at least the building fees. And then they're just always approved.
We
You don't have to worry about it.
We do that with our other fees, so that's easy.
So that's something you're going to see, and so I wanted to make sure that you understood why and was aware of that piece of legislation. And then the next one, House Bill 2468. So this amends workers' comp statute to basically allow if a first responder is injured, severely injured on the job and is permanently unemployable, that first responder now under this legislation is granted lifetime benefits and doesn't have to apply annually for those benefits.
You might recall, those of you here previously, that we actually worked toward getting something like this done for a couple of sessions after firefighter Andy Allison suffered that exact situation, had to reapply every year. And I understand he now has lifetime, so it's not affecting him, but it could happen again.
So good bill that passed from our perspective. And then another piece of legislation that passed this session, House Bill 3492 by Representative Stuckey. This relates to value-based fees. So it basically says the city cannot use the value of constructing or improving infrastructure in determining your engineering inspection fees. And so this will just require a fee ordinance change relating to your engineering inspection fees and then also the engineering site plan review fees. Anything you want to add there, James?
If I remember correctly, I think our engineering fees are okay on, but our building inspection
No,
fees
it's our
the other way
engineering,
around.
yeah,
Okay,
our
it's
engineering fees. So basically, your fees would be based on, if you know you're gonna have this amount of public, public infrastructure in your project, then we base it on a percentage of whatever that value is, because that kind of generally estimates, if you've got a lot of public infrastructure, it's gonna be a lot more time. So we really have to, I think, really the APWA is we're working with multiple cities trying to figure out, okay, how do we value these and what's the best way?
Can you do it by the foot?
One of the things I was throwing out there too. So we've got a meeting coming with a bunch of directors, engineers, city engineers, and public works directors. They're meeting here at our new fleet building to kind of talk through how people are going to skin that cat.
We're getting close to our deadline.
Yes, sir. And then final bill, Senate Bill 577 by Senator Springer, minimal impact to the city, will require some ordinance changes. This is really related to your ordinances related to food service establishments and food trucks and other mobile food units. And basically just says if your ordinances differ from state law, kind of similar to the preemption bill, then you have to register those differences with the state registry with the Department of State Health Services. And that concludes our legislative update, except to say that we have multiple special sessions expected. We've already seen 2. There will be many more. The next one we expect will be in the fall related to education issues, teacher pay raises, and vouchers, and then many other special sessions expected during this interim. Hopefully the TSTC funding endowment fund is one of them.
Feel there's any chance of a destination sales tax coming up in these special sessions getting tacked on to something else?
No, there was no momentum from the governor on that issue. Like I said, it was really a focus of Chairman Meyer.
The one caveat I would add on these topics is after the session, during the session, the legislature has the power. Afterward, the governor does because he signs or vetoes. And he wanted to put pressure on them during the first special session, so he started vetoing bills, and then more bills, and then bills that just surprised people based on what they would do and who they were authored by. But a number of times when he announced the veto, he said, I'm vetoing this because it's too vague or it's too broad. But If they want to bring it back, we can look at it again, which is almost implies that he might allow some of those to come back in a special session. So we're watching those as well.
And most of the bills that he vetoed that James is describing, the authors of those bills were opponents of vouchers. So those issues may come back in a special session and they may not. Other questions, comments?
Before we conclude this, I wanted to thank Brandy. She really brought a new strategy to our legislative process, one that was much more collaborative than we've done in past years, and I think it has shown to be much more effective. So the amount of amendments we've gotten that have saved us with regard to, exceptions, our massage parlor bill, she worked really hard, so I want to thank Brandy. She's been exceptional.
Yeah, huge thank you to staff, to our state representatives. It's the first time in my history where I just felt like every oar was in the water on the issues that we wanted to move, and we were able to move them, the ones that we had the opportunity to work with. So I really appreciate it. I know it's a big disruption of everybody's time and effort, the things that focus on the city, but to be able to do this every couple of years and have Brandy and the team driving this, I think is awesome. We definitely hit above our weight this year, and I'm excited to be able to have that kind of input at the state level. So thank you guys. Thank every one of you for the work you did.
Thank you.
All right, with that, we've got about 4 minutes until we go into our regular session, so the workshop is closed. Good evening. It is 7 o'clock, and we're going to call this meeting of the Lewisville City Council to order. We do have a quorum. Starting up, we do have our invocation tonight with Councilmember Jones.
Thank you. Please join me in a moment of silent contemplation and prayer. Thank you.
Councilmember Troyer, would you lead us in the pledges?
Please join me in the pledges to the U.S. and the Texas flags. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state under God, one and indivisible.
All right. City Secretary Thomas Harris III, you ready? We got some work to do. All right. Next up on tonight's agenda, we have an amazing group of residents. And these are our boards and commissions members. And I want to thank you all of you that are here, those of you who could not make it. I expect several of you to end up here at some point because that's how it works best. Your time, your treasure, your attention to detail, your ability to get through the materials that you have to be able to give direction to staff, and most importantly, to be able to give direction to this body, to allow us to make those well-informed decisions that impact residents on a day-to-day basis. This is the local work of local government, and I'm so, so proud of you all investing your time in your city. So with that, I think we're just going to ask everybody who is newly appointed or refreshed, if you would please come to the front here. And we're going to do this all as a group. So, Mr. Harris, I'm going to let you lead on.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mayor.
deploying certificates. Is that outside? Okay. So before you leave, we have a really cool award just after this. I'd love for you to stay with us for that presentation. But as you leave tonight, we have our different directors outside, and they will be handing you your certificates. So I want to shake your hands as you go back to seating. So if you don't mind, just come back this way, just because I'm so proud of you guys for investing in the city, and thank you so much. Let's give them one more hand. Next up, we do have a presentation of a life-saving award for our Parks and Recreation Department employees. And I have Mr. James Shields, our Parks Foreman, here to present the awards. Mr. Shields?
How you doing, sir? Julio and Scott, go ahead and come up here. Well, good evening, everybody. So I was asked to speak on behalf of Julio and Scott for an incident that happened out at the lake. So on June 19th, Julio and Scott were working their regular shift picking up trash along the shoreline at Lake Park. At this time, Julio noticed that a child was struggling to swim out in the lake, bobbing up and down underneath the water. Scott was with him. And without hesitation, both of them just kicked their boots off and they just go in the water after this young man. Julio was the first one that was able to get to him and swam him to a buoy. And then once Scott noticed that, Scott turns around, goes back in to shore to get their crew leader, Tony, to inform them of what had happened. And then there were some jet skiers that were out that actually had seen the whole incident, and they were able to get Julio and the young man that he had got to the buoy back to shore safely. Tony went and talked to the parents to see if the child needed medical assistance or if they needed to call, ambulance, anything like that. And they said, no, we're fine. So then Tony calls me, tells me I had an incident. I go out there, and I do the same thing as soon as I get out there. Just make sure, everybody's good. They reassured us that, their kid is fine. And the father actually said to us while I was standing there that without Julio and Scott, their son would not be there. So they literally saved the young man's life. After talking with them, I went to check on Julio and Scott. They said they were doing good. Everything was fine. And then as Lewisville employees, we talk about the Lewisville way and, value, serve, and build. It's kind of one thing that we, talk to our guys. We have our signs up all over the place and stuff like that. And, this was one thing that, they valued this child's life over their own life. They served our community by doing something that could not be assigned to them. It was a heart. It was, and I got to go out here and save this kid's life, and that was for our community. And then valuing, building. They built a future for this young man because without them, he doesn't have a future. And so, Julio and Scott did not want the recognition. They didn't want to come up here. And so, and I begged them, to come up here because this is something that, they need to be recognized for. it just shows the character that we have in our department and the character of these two men right here. And so with that, I would like to say thank you again, Julio and Scott, for what y'all did. Sir. Okay. Thanks.
Julio. Scott. You guys, it's about building community. That's what you do. I'm proud of you. I'm proud of what you did. Thank you so much for your time. Now, I know all of you came here for the swearing in and whatnot, are just going to love to stay here for the rest of the meeting, because that's the kind of citizen you are. So I'm very excited to see a full house for the rest of the meeting. That's not going to happen. Appreciate you all being here. Thank you so much. Item D, public hearing. 1, public hearing, consideration of an ordinance granting a zone change from single-family residential 7.5 district to Old Town Mixed Use 2 district on approximately .1641 acres, legally described as Lot 10, Block D, LM Keeley Edition, located at 177 West Purnell Street. As requested by Nika Reineke, the applicant, on behalf of Envision Planning Group, LLC, the property owner, case number 23-05-8-Z. The applicant is requesting to rezone 177 West Purnell Street from single-family residential 7.5 district to Old Town Mixed Use 2 district. The request is in alignment with the Lewisville 2025 Vision Plan and the Old Town Master Plan. The Planning and Zoning Committee recommended unanimous approval 5-0 on June 20th, 2023. And it is recommended that the City Council approve the ordinances set forth in the caption above. We do have Michelle Berry, our planning manager, available for any questions, Council. If there are no questions, I'll entertain a motion.
Move to close the public hearing.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Council, please vote. Motion passes 6-0. Council, I'll entertain a motion to approve the ordinance.
Can I go ahead and read it?
I need a motion and approval.
Move to approve the ordinance as set forth in the caption.
All right.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. City Attorney?
This is an ordinance of the Lewisville City Council amending the zoning ordinance by rezoning approximately 0.1641 acres legally described as Lot 10, Block D, LM Keeley Edition, located at 177 West Purnell Road, from single-family residential R-7.5 district zoning to Old Town Mixed Use 2 OTMU 2 district zoning, correcting the official zoning map, preserving all other portions of the zoning ordinance, determining that the zoning amendment herein made promotes the health, safety, and general welfare of the city, providing for repeal or severability, a penalty, and an effective date, and declaring an emergency.
Council, if you'd please vote. Motion passes unanimously. Public hearing, item 2. Consideration of an ordinance granting a zone change from single-family residential 7.5 district to Old Town Mixed Use 2 district on approximately .3282 acres, legally described as lots 2 and 3, Block D, LM Keeley Edition, located at 170 Edwards Street, as requested by Nika Reineke, the applicant, on behalf of Yellow Arrow Properties, LLC, the property owner. Case number 23-05-9-Z. The application is requesting to rezone 170 Edwards Street from single-family residential 7.5 to District Old Town Mixed Use 2 District. The request is in alignment with the Lewisville 2025 Vision Plan and the Old Town Master Plan. The Planning and Zoning Commission recommended unanimous approval 5-0 on June 20th, 2023, and it is recommended that the City Council approve the ordinance as set forth in the caption above. Michelle Berry is available for questions, and if there are no questions, I'll entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
Move to close the public hearing.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Council, please vote. Vote passes unanimously. I'll entertain a motion to approve.
Motion to approve.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. City Attorney?
This is an ordinance of the Lewisville City Council amending the zoning ordinance by rezoning approximately 0.3282 acres legally described as lots 2 and 3, Block D, LM Keeley Edition, located at 170 Edwards Street, from single-family residential R-7.5 district zoning to Old Town Mixed Use 2 OTMU-2 district zoning, correcting the official zoning map, preserving all other portions of the zoning ordinance, determining that the zoning amendment herein made promotes the health, safety, and general welfare of the city, providing for repeal or severability, a penalty, and an effective date, and declaring an emergency.
Council, if you'd please vote. Motion passes unanimously. Public hearing number 3, consideration of an ordinance granting a zone change from light industrial district to agricultural open space district to heavy and agricultural open space district to heavy industrial district on approximately 2.417 acres out of the LN Sparks Survey, abstract 1214, located at southwest corner of East Valley Ridge Boulevard and East Main Street at 1018 East Main Street, as requested by Patricia Fatt, McAdams, the applicant, on behalf of CB Green Investments LLC and George M. Green, the property owners, case number 23-03-5-Z. The subject property is currently bisected by a portion of East Main Street, which has since been rerouted. The portion of the property north of East Main Street is vacant, while the portion to the south contains a fenced storage yard. Potential development of the property is difficult due to multiple zoning designations on the property, along with the irregular shape of the fragmented parcels. The applicant is working through the process of abandoning the unused right-of-way that splits the property. No immediate development is anticipated. The proposed zoning of heavy industrial is consistent with surrounding zoning. Any intense uses proposed in the future on this site will require approval of a special use permit. The Planning and Zoning Commission recommended unanimous approval 5-0 on June 20th, 2023, and it is recommended that the City Council approve the ordinance as set forth in the caption above. Michelle Berry, our planning manager, is available for questions. And if there are none, I'll entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
Move to close the public hearing.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Council, please vote. Hearing is closed unanimously. I'll entertain a motion to approve the ordinance.
Once we get that, yeah, there you go. Oh, William got it.
Motion to approve the ordinance is set forth in the caption.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. City Attorney?
This is an ordinance of the Lewisville City Council amending the zoning ordinance by rezoning approximately 2.417 acres out of the LN Sparks Survey, abstract 1214, located on the southwest corner of East Valley Ridge Boulevard and East Main Street, and at 1018 East Main Street, from light industrial LI district zoning and agricultural open space AO district zoning to heavy industrial HI district zoning, correcting the official zoning map, preserving all other portions of the zoning ordinance, determining that the zoning welfare herein made promotes the health, safety, and general welfare of the city, providing for a repealer, severability, a penalty, and an effective date, and declaring an emergency.
Council, if you'd please vote. Motion passes unanimously. Public hearing number 4, consideration of an ordinance granting a special use permit for motorcycle sales and service on a portion of an approximately 2.32 acre tract legally described as Lot 2R, Block B, McGee Addition Phase 2, located at 1865 McGee Lane, Zone Light Industrial District, as requested by Kevin Gilly, Two Wheels Down LLC, on behalf of Iron Peak McGee LLC, the property owner. Case number 23-04-6-SUP. Two Wheels Down is a business that specializes in the sales and minor service of motorcycles. There will be no outdoor display of motorcycles at this property. The special use permit regulations adopted in 2013 require an SUP with all motorcycle sales and service businesses. The Planning and Zoning Commission recommended unanimous approval 5-0 on June 20th, 2023, and has recommended that the City Council approve the ordinance as set forth in the caption. We do have Michelle Berry, our planning manager, available for questions, as well as Mr. Kevin Gilly, who is here to answer questions in support of the public hearing. If there are no questions, I'll entertain a motion to close.
Motion to close the public hearing.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Council, please vote. Motion passes unanimously. I'll entertain a motion to approve the ordinance.
Motion to approve the ordinance set forth in the caption.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. City Attorney?
This is an ordinance of the Lewisville City Council amending the zoning ordinance by granting a special use permit for motorcycle sales and service on a portion of an approximately 2.32 acre lot tract, legally described as Lot 2R, Block B, McGee Addition Phase 2, located at 1865 McGee Lane and Zone Light Industrial LI District, providing for repealer, severability, penalty, and an effective date, and declaring an emergency.
Council, if you please vote. Motion passes unanimously. Public hearing number 5, consideration of an ordinance granting a special use permit for boat sales and service on a portion of an approximately 2.32 acre tract, legally described as Lot 2R, Block B, McGee Addition, Phase 2, located at 1865 McGee Lane, Zone Light Industrial District, as requested by Tim Hassel, NTX Elite Marine, on behalf of Iron Peak McGee, LLC, the property owner. NTX Elite Marine is a business established in February 2023 that specializes in the sales and installation of marine electronic equipment. There will be no outdoor display of boats at this property. Service work and any overnight storage of boats will be inside the building. The special use permit regulations adopted in 2013 required an SUP with all boat service businesses. The Planning and Zoning Commission recommended unanimous approval 5-0 on June 20th, 2023. It is recommended that the City Council approve the ordinance as set forth in the caption above. We do have Michelle Berry, our planning manager, as well as Steve Willems, available for questions. Mr. Willems is here to speak in favor, or not to speak, but to answer questions and to support this public hearing. If there are no questions, I'll entertain a motion to close.
Move to close the public hearing.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Council, please vote. Motion passes 6-0. I'll entertain a motion to approve the ordinance as set forth.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. City Attorney?
This is an ordinance of the Lewisville City Council amending the zoning ordinance by granting a special use permit for boat sales and service on a portion of an approximately 2.32 acre tract legally described as Lot 2R, Block B, McGee Addition, Phase 2, located at 1865 McGee Lane and Zone Light Industrial LI District, providing for repeal or severability, penalty, and an effective date, and declaring an emergency.
Council, please vote. Motion passes unanimously. Item E, Visitor Citizens Forum. Speakers must address their comments to the mayor rather than to individual council members or staff. Speakers should speak clearly and state their name and address prior to beginning their remarks. Speakers will be allowed 5 minutes for testimony. Speakers making personal, impertinent, profane, or slanderous remarks may be removed from the meeting. Unauthorized remarks from the audience, stamping of feet, whistles, yells, clapping, and similar demonstrations will not be permitted. In accordance with the Texas Open Meetings Act, the City Council is restricted from discussing or taking action on items not listed on the agenda. Action can only be taken at a future meeting. City Secretary, do we have any comment cards or e-comments?
We do have one e-comment, but no signups for in-person.
Okay. And I do have that e-comment from Mr. Gary Ferguson. Council, this will be sent to you via email, but Mr. Ferguson has expressed concerns about safety risks and disruptions from short-term rentals. So something to take a look at and see. And my understanding is that this has also been forwarded to the police department to take a look at for neighborhood disturbance. All right. Item F, consent agenda. All of the following items on the consent agenda are considered to be self-explanatory by the council and will be enacted with one motion. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless a council member or citizen so request. For a citizen to request removal of an item, a speaker card or e-comment must be filled out and submitted to the city secretary. City Secretary, do we have any speaker cards or e-comments?
No, sir, Mr. Mayor.
All right. I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Council, please vote. Consent agenda is approved unanimously. Item 12, regular hearing. Consideration of one appointment to place number 5, an arts educator on the Arts Advisory Board. At the June 19th, 2023 City Council meeting, a vacancy was declared for place number 5 on the Arts Advisory Board. Place number 5 has a requirement to be filled by an educator in an arts subject. Staff received one application that meets the requirement, and the application is included in the backup for this item. It's recommended that the City Council consider one appointment to place number 5 on the Arts Advisory Board. Council, do we have a motion?
Motion to appoint Amy Farley to place number 5 on the Arts Advisory Board.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Council, please vote. Motion passes unanimously. Amy, thank you so much for volunteering and being part of our Arts Advisory Board. Item H, reports. Reports about items of community interest regarding which no action will be taken. Councilmember Kelly, would you mind if we started with you today?
Yeah, I was kind of hoping not to go first, because I just wanted to. I'm just going to try to get through this real quick here. So I lost a friend on Monday. So Lisa with the crossing guard at Castle Hills, and she did a great job. The kids all loved her, and we're going to miss her dearly.
Thank you, Patrick. Yeah, she will be missed. Kristen?
So I had a couple of things I wanted to say. First, in light of the life-saving award that we had tonight, how proud I am of our staff, that they would step outside of their day-to-day duties to do something that was probably a bit scary to do, but very necessary. This time of year, it always saddens me to hear about the number of drownings that we do have on the lake. And I actually saw a news story about it a week or two ago. And what the firefighter said, I wanted to reiterate. I have never rescued somebody, I've never pulled somebody out of the lake that has drowned that is wearing a life jacket. So please, please, please remember to wear your life jacket. I know it's hot, and I know it's more comfortable to swim without a life jacket, but they really do save lives. The next thing I wanted to mention is a little more fun. I've noticed there's a lot of calls for Western Days. Western Days is upon us. It's going to be here in a blink of an eye. So we are taking applications for vendors, also for the tamale eating competition. I don't know if maybe, the mayor might want to get in on that this year. I don't know.
I was working on the mullet for this year.
I have not seen anything about the mullet competition yet, so I don't know what the mayor's got up his sleeve. We'll see.
I'm hoping they open it up to the kids.
That's all I had.
So I just wanted to remind all of our high school students that we are taking applications for the Youth Action Council. They are due by August 1st. Applications can be emailed to the Lewisville Training and Equity Manager, Tamara Miller, at tmiller@cityoflewisville.com. We have a lot of successful young folks out there who took part of the Youth Action Council, and you can come join them. You'll be future leaders of our city. That's all I have.
I want to piggyback off of what Kristen has says about the life jackets and such. Unfortunately, the number of individuals that have drowned out there, there seems to be a false sense when the buoys are up that that's a safe place on this side of the buoys. The lake is the lake. Currents are going to wash things out. What the buoys do is they keep the boats out. And unfortunately, as they drown, right on shore was every size life jacket you could possibly have. And they're not being used. It's beyond a shame. I don't. We can't legislate common sense, but we could all pull together and try to stop a drowning a day. I would like to say, too, that our shelters are way beyond capacity to the point, and I just want you to think about this, and it's not just our municipal animal shelter. We're talking about the rescue organizations. Microchip your dog, your cat, your guinea pig. We had several of them in there, very pregnant. But when a dog comes in, there's hard decisions because we're so over capacity. Something has to go. So then they have to make an assessment of which one is being euthanized. It's we're at critical mass.
So go get you a friend.
Go get a friend or two or three.
There you go. Councilwoman Meredith?
Yes, Mayor, I've got some library activities for the week. Paper marbling for teens aged 13 to 18, Thursday, July 20th, 6:30 to 7:30. Registration is required at the Glenmore Savage Community Room. Arduino open house for all ages, 9 and under, accompanied by an adult. Friday, July 21st, noon to 4:30. Saturday, July 22nd, 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. No registration required at the Hive Makerspace. That's all I've got.
Thank you. Councilmember Troyer?
Yes, Mayor. I have a bunch of things going on at the Lewisville Grand Theater in the next couple weeks. First of all, on July 22nd, Saucy Thoughts podcast, presented by Texas poet Samba Say, will be presenting. And I must say that Samba attended our Rotary, my Lewisville Morning Rotary, passed the gavel event a week ago. And during the event, he was given the challenge of writing a poem about the event on the spot. And he did a tremendous job. So if you have a chance, go hear Samba on the 22nd. Acoustic Friday's Quarterly Songwriting Challenge will be presented by the Visual Art League of Lewisville on July 28th. And it's always a very great event to see what kind of local talent we have for writing and composing songs and presenting them. From Shame to Grace, presented by the Society for Depressed Artists, will be presented on August 5th and 6th. And then Elvis, Gospel and Beyond, featuring Craig Parker, presented by Stardom Entertainment on August 5th. And as always, on Friday nights, the acoustic jam sessions presented by the Visual Art League of Lewisville. And then activities going on in the plaza and in the theater. Garden Secrets class, Fall Vegetable Gardening, presented by Keep Lewisville Beautiful on August 3rd. Pilates in the Plaza, presented by Pilates in the City, Wednesdays. This is a change from last year. Yoga in the Plaza, presented by Blue Anjou Studios, Thursdays. And Tai Chi in the Plaza, presented by Lowell Johnson on Saturdays. And then finally, 2 exhibitions going on right now. Life is a Theater, From Shame to Grace, presented by the Society of Depressed Artists. That is through August 6th. And Fresh Ideas 2023, presented by the Visual Art League of Lewisville, and that is going on through August 19th. And that's my report.
Thank you, sir. City Attorney, City Secretary? No report. Economic Development? Little red light just does not want to work for you today.
No reports.
No report. No report, Mayor.
I will stop the streak. I'm happy to report that the lake level is holding steady at 521.11 feet, which is 95.8% full.
Thank you. See? All right. City Manager? No. All right. I just have a couple of small items. This Sunday, I had the privilege of going to a celebration, a 3-year anniversary celebration for a Latin American family practice, Sagrada Familia. These were Venezuelan refugees that he was a doctor, came to the United States, started his practice right before COVID, and has expanded to 5 locations, the 5th one being in San Antonio. And it was amazing to go there, to use my very, very limited Spanish, but really to enjoy the celebration of a local business that was successful and is continuing to grow. Right afterwards, I actually had the privilege of meeting with 3 of the Myanmar government in exile departments, their departmental folks, executives from the exile government. They were here in Lewisville fundraising, of course, because they are right in the middle of a revolution against a coup, not unlike what's going on in Ukraine. So they're looking for the same kinds of assistance to continue democracy across the world. But it was a fascinating conversation, and again, it was another piece of our amazing diversity here in Lewisville that I get to celebrate on Sunday. So it was a great privilege, a great honor, but these are the kinds of things and the kinds of communities we have right here, which is really amazing. I do want to let you know about 2 items. This Wednesday at the library from 6 to 7 o'clock, I will be giving our mayor's quarterly update. Would love to have you come by, ask questions. I've got a few items to discuss, but there's always Q&A time, and it'll be right there at the library at 6 to 7 o'clock. And if you can't find the Bennett room, I'm sure somebody there can direct you. And finally, I have the privilege of being the Master of Ceremonies for the CCA 5K that's coming up, that's kicking off our Western Days on September 30th. I know it seems like a long way away, but September 30th is right around the corner. Would love it. Again, this is their 50th anniversary, and of course this is my 50th year around the sun, so there's some synergy going on there. I can't say that my time is going to be equal to a stampede, as they say here. I'm probably more of a swagger or a mosey. But if you care to kick off Western Days with me that morning, just head over to your local social media, check out CCA, Christian Community Action, and sign up for their 5K. With that, we do have a small bit of closed session tonight. So in accordance with Texas Government Code, Subchapter D, Section 551.071, consultation with attorney, legal issues regarding Section 2058-.0021 of the Texas Government Code and Chapter 145 of the Texas Local Government Code. With that, we are going to move into closed session. All right, as there is no further action to be taken on tonight's agenda, it is 10:56 and we are adjourned. I'm sorry, 7:56. I just rounded up the time. That's military time. 1956. How's that?
I missed a lot of information.